In this lecture, we're going to learn about the stdarray built-in collection type. And this is a collection type we can use to store a bunch of things. It is special in that it is going to be wrapping around a fixed size array. And what that means is that once you create an stdarray, you can't change its size anymore. So if you try and put in more elements that can fit in that array, you will get a compiler error. And this is by design. stdarray is the fixed size container. And this is going to come in handy if you need these kind of things in your C++ application. You will have access to it by including the array header. And if we go to CPP reference, we're going to find all the documentation for this if we want. It is a container that encapsulates fixed size arrays. And here we have some mumbo jumbo that is really not going to make much sense, especially for beginners. But that's okay. We will learn more about these things as we progress in the chapter and learn about iterators and all kinds of crazy things. For now, we want the basics of working with these containers. You see that we have the same facilities we had for std vector to access things. In an stdarray object, we can use the @ method, we can use the operator, square bracket, we can use the front method and the back method. We even have a data method we can use to get access to the underlying array. And this is really cool. Down here, you see that we have a bunch of iterators we can use with this type, but for now, you can ignore this thing on iterators because we haven't really learned about them. We have a bunch of methods we can use to query about the capacity of our stdarray object. We can test and see if it is empty. We can query for its size. We can fill it with elements. We can really do all kinds of crazy things. If you go down here, you will find a bunch of examples you can try out. But we will head over to Visual Studio Code and try this out in a minute. So here are a few things we can do with stdarrays. You can create objects of stdarray just like we do here. Once we do this, this is going to create an array object which is going to contain 3 elements. If you try to put in more than 3, you will get a compiler error here because this is a fixed size container. This is really important to understand. And by default, the array will just contain junk data, but you can initialize your array with data. So for example, if we put in 1 and 2, the first and second element will be initialized to 1 and 2, and the last element will be initialized to 0. You can use an empty pair of braces, and this is going to initialize everything to 0. We can do something like this. We can let the compiler deduce the size by using something like this and say int array and not specify anything and just put in data. So the compiler is going to look at the type of the data we have in. It is going to deduce int. That's what we have here. And it is going to see that we have 2 elements n, and it is going to deduce 2. So the compiler is really smart to deduce this kind of information from what you put in. But if you try and put in more elements that can fit in your stdarray object, you will get a compiler error. For example, here we have an stdarray containing 3 elements, but we are trying to put in 5, and this is going to throw a compiler error. It is also possible to use the make array facility, but this is really compiler specific. This is going to work on GCC, but it is not going to work on the compiler from Microsoft, if I remember correctly. So you need to be aware of these little things here. Once you have your array objects set up, you can really print them out using a bunch of functions you can set up. And we're going to see how this works in a minute, but it is really not going to be different from what we did for std vector. Now let's look at how we can put data in our stdarray object. And I am going to disappoint you and tell you that we don't really have much flexibility in doing that. Because stdarray is a fixed size container, it is really meaningful to put in the data when you create it. So we don't have the pushback or popback methods that we had before. You only have the ability to put in data when you create an stdarray object. But we can also fill it with data if we want. So for example, if we call the fill method on our array here, it is going to be filled with this value. And you can do this if you want, but we don't really have much more flexibility in adding stuff like we do for std vector. If you need more flexibility in adding and removing stuff, maybe stdarray is not your type. And that's the idea. The standard template library is going to give you a host of container types that you can use, and you will have to study the problem that you want to solve and find a container type that really matches your problem. That's how you should use the STL. It is also possible to loop around and print stuff. So this is our print array method, which is going to really loop however many times it needs, printing each element using the square bracket operator as we do for row arrays. And this is going to do exactly what we did for std vector. We have the same facilities for accessing elements like we do for vector. We have the array index operator, we have the at method, we have the front and back methods. We even have a data method we can call to get access to the underlying array. These are all things you can do with stdarray. Here is a simple method which can print the underlying row array, and it is exactly what we saw for std vector, so nothing new here. And now that you know these things, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Here we are in our working folder. The current project is stdarray. We will grab the code from our template files and we will use this as a starting point for this lecture here. Let's put in the files and we will open this little guy in Visual Studio Code. And we will have our main CPP file. Let's clean this up a little bit and remove what we don't need. If we go to the documentation for stdarray, we will see that to use it, we need to include the array header. So we're going to come back to Visual Studio Code and do that, include array. We will set up a method or a function which is going to print an array, and this is going to be a templated function. It is going to have two template parameters because we need another one for the size of the array, so you need to be aware of this. And we're going to grab this array and really print it out. We're going to loop this number of times and we will use the size method to deduce the size of the array. We can call this method and we will print using the array index operator, and everything is going to fall in place. Now let's look at different ways we can create stdarray objects. And here is our code. We have int array1, which is going to contain junk data because it's really not going to be initialized, but it is going to contain 3 slots for elements. And this is a fixed size container, so you only have the ability to put in 3 elements. And if you try and put in more, you will get a bunch of compiler errors. We can also create one by putting in the data explicitly, and this is going to initialize with the data we pass in. What we don't put in is going to be 0 initialized, as we see for the third element here. We can put in an empty pair of braces. This is going to initialize everything to 0. And we can even omit the template arguments, and the compiler is going to deduce them based on the data that we put in here. So it is going to look at the number and use this to deduce the size of the array that we could create under the hood, and it is going to look at the type of the elements we put in here and deduce the first template parameter here, and this is how this is going to work. But if you try and put in more elements that can fit in an stdarray, you will get a compiler error because this is a fixed size container. This is the main design purpose for stdarray. So if you violate this design principle, you will get a compiler error because stdarray is really not designed to expand. It is designed to contain a fixed number of elements. So let's try and pass this through our compiler. We're going to use GCC for that. And we will see that this is going to give us a compiler error, so we have no business doing this. Another thing that is possible if you are using GCC is to use the make array facility, but this is not standard. This is not going to work on the compiler from Microsoft. I don't think it is also going to work for Clang, but you can try this out and see. I am really not sure about that. And to make this work, you will need to put in a header, which is going to be experimental. So we're going to say include and say experimental and say array. This is going to give us access to the make array facility to create an stdarray object under the hood. You see that the compiler is going to deduce this to be stdarray int3. So you can use this if you are on GCC, but I don't recommend this. But I want you to be aware of this. I think we can keep this in, but if you are not on GCC, you can remove this because it is not going to compile, or you can try this out and see how this works out. Now you have the experience to really try things out and decide what to use in your C++ program. Okay, now that we have these arrays created, we can print them out. So let's go down and put in a bunch of print array statements. We're going to print 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 because we have them set up here. Let's pass this through the compiler and see the data printed out. The build is going to be good, so we can bring up a terminal window and clear to run rooster. We're going to see our data. We have int array 1 is going to contain 0, 0, 0. Int array 2 is going to contain 1, 2, 0. Int array 3 is going to be 0 initialized. We will have a bunch of zeros then. 4 is going to be initialized with 1, 2. This is what we expect. 6 is going to contain 1, 2, all the way to 5, and this is what we have. This is working as we want. We don't have much flexibility when it comes to adding stuff to an stdarray object. And this is by design. Because this guy is a fixed size container, it is really meant to be supplied with data when you create your object, just like we did on top here. So this is how stdarray is meant to be used. You put in the data when you create the object, and that's really the only window you have to put data in your thing. But it is possible to fill our array with data, so we can use the fill method to fill any data. And this is going to overwrite whatever we had in before. So if we build and run this program, we can pass this through GCC. We're going to see that array 1 and 4 are going to be overridden with the data that we just put in here. So the build is good. As you see here, we can clear and run rooster. Now we will see that array 1 no longer contains junk data. It is going to contain this data here. And array 4 is no longer going to contain 1 and 2. It is going to contain 500. And again, the message is that we don't have much more flexibility in adding stuff in an stdarray object that we have already created, because std arrays are meant to be supplied with data when they are being created. This is really how they should be used. It is also possible to access elements in an stdarray object, much like we did for std vector. We can use the array index operator, we can use the at method, we can use the front method, we can use the back method. It is even possible to use the print row array method like we did for std vector. This is going to use the data method to pass the underlying row array to be printed out by methods or functions that expect row pointers, and this is going to work really well. To make this work, we will go on top and put in our print row array method. If you want, you can grab the code from the resource section and really paste it in. I don't think there is much more to explain on this things. Now that you really are a master at C++, you know quite a lot if you made it this far in the course, and congratulations on that. So we have this in and we can use our code here, and we're going to see that it is going to work. You can try these things out. Let's pass this through our compiler. The build is going to be good, so let's clear and run rooster, and we will see that we can use all these syntaxes to access data. This is going to give us what we want, and we can even use the print row array method, and this is going to print our array, and everything is going to fall in place. This is really all I had to share in this lecture, showing you basic usage for stdarray. If you want more information, you can come to your favorite C++ standard library documentation. You can really learn all you want about stdarray here. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we will start and learn about iterators. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.